Greetings Guardians, my name is Bife here. So if you're watching this video, it means that the seasonal story has come to an end, and I'm taking a long break for the first time in a while. So we're making some less topical and more general lore content to hopefully tide all of you over while I'm away. To that end, we're going to be ranking Destiny's raid bosses according to how powerful they are in the lore. First things first, rules for this tier list. Number 1 is that we're ranking all of these villains at the height of their power. That helps to avoid arguments about timing and circumstances, and it helps us to really understand the potential power of each of these villains. Number 2, whilst these are my opinions, I'm not ranking them in a vacuum. My rankings are based on the actual lore. If there is no reason why a fallen Dreg should rank higher than the Witness, then it won't be ranked higher than the Witness. Number 3, I don't know all the lore. Surprising to some, I understand, but there may be bits and pieces that I've missed. So if there are some factors that I've missed, then please do let me know down below in the comments section for next time. Number 4, how easy the raid was for you is not going to factor in. Fights can be differing levels of difficulty for different people, and more importantly, your individual raid experiences are far too vast to account for. So, nobody's raid experience is being accounted for, we're running it strictly based on what the lore says. Number 5. Whilst other enemies that support these raid bosses aren't being evaluated, there are some instances where their power is also considered because of how integral those factors are to them. The best example is going to be with something like, say, a Vex raid boss, where inevitably they act as part of a greater Vex subtype, and therefore the whole role of the subtype sort of has to be considered. Okay, so that straightens things out quite nicely, I hope, but let's begin. Also, do note that our rankings for these categories are pretty typical. You have S, A, B, C, D, E, and F. Nothing out of the ordinary for a tier list video. Our raid boss contenders include the following: Atheon times Conflux, Crota the son of Oryx, Oryx the Taken King, Axis the Archon Prime, Emperor Callus, Argos the Planetary Core, Val Kaur, Riven of 1,000 Voices, Insurrection Prime, Galran the Sorrow Bearer, the Sanctified Mind, Taniks the Abomination, and finally, Rulk, Disciple of the Witness. Do note that we're doing main raid bosses, so we're not going to be looking at anything like Golgoroth, the War Priest, Axis, etc. All of those, if you want them, can get their own video, but for the moment, we're just doing final bosses. Starting off with Atheon, I think we need to understand the biggest factor when ranking the power of these different entities, which is going to be whether or not they're paracausal. To give newer players an idea of what that means through a simple explanation, paracausal beings can break the rules of the universe. They don't have to abide by the same rules as a typical combatant does. For us Guardians, this is a part of the reason why we can throw supers. For those of our enemies, it can mean the ability to call directly on the powers of the darkness or the light. This is one of, if not the most important of metrics for scaling and understanding one's power in all of Destiny, and whilst there are those such as Dominus Ghaul who proved that paracausality, in his case the light, is not everything, in practical terms a paracausal entity beats out a causal one 99,999 times out of 100,000. Atheon is an example of an entity that challenges this trend with a little success. Atheon is a Vex construct of the Hazen Protective, a Vex sub-mind grouping that's found on Venus in the Ishtar Sink, specifically within the Vault of Glass. Atheon is the Vex construct that lies at the Vault's heart. In a way, we therefore can't evaluate Atheon without recognizing that the Vex operate as a single system, and therefore there's a lot of power bound up in the rest of the Hazen Protective that Atheon can claim as its own too. Atheon's power is the power over time, and it has the ability to send its opponents backwards and forwards in the time stream in order to get them lost in those dark corners of time. If that wasn't enough, it's also able to make use of the oracles, Vex supercomputational units that are able to determine if something's existence challenges the future of the Vex or not. If they're seen to be an offending party, you can literally be expunged from the timeline by Atheon when they have marked you. This isn't just to die, this means that you never existed. All that power, and Atheon is still technically a causal being, considering the way that the Vault of Glass and the Vex operate. The Vex of the Vault have proven that they're able to take on some paracausal forces. They defeated most members of the first Vault Fire team, and it's speculated, but not confirmed, that the reason why this raid team was a fire team of just 3 is because there were others who originally came with them who were lost to Atheon's time-warping abilities, and they're just no longer remembered because they were expunged from the timeline. However, the Vex of the Vault of Glass, and Atheon generally, are not completely immune from paracausal forces of significant power. There are 2 great examples of that. The first is us, and the second is Oryx. Take a look at what happened when the Taken invaded the Vault of Glass in the Taken King expansion. The Hazen Protective, well, may not necessarily be Atheon at that point, but it proves the point that their powers within the Vault were not enough to hold back the tide of the Taken King. This represents the causal weakness that haunts many of the Vex. All these factors combined have made me put Atheon in B tier. Yep, that's right, this first raid boss controls time and it's going in the B tier. That's how much paracausality matters. Atheon is absolutely on par with some of the paracausal threats, keep in mind, but when facing any real paracausal competition, even its asymmetric time-warping abilities are not enough to save it. Next up we have Crota, the son of Oryx. Now, whilst Crota was a meme in Destiny 1 for all the ways you could net limit him and force him to kneel so that you could just infinitely smack him with a sword, he was still a pretty remarkable force in the lore. As an Ascendant Hive, with a throne world, he could only be killed within said throne world. This gives him, and any other Ascendant Hive on this list, a remarkable degree of resilience and power already, and that's before you consider his accomplishments in the lore. From becoming a legendary demon across the universe, to defeating an army of 1,000 guardians, including the extremely powerful Titan Wei Ning, Crota is a powerful foe. This is not taking into account his powers when he's in his throne world, including his Oversoul, a mechanism that allows him to instantly kill all those who fail to challenge its wrathful and baleful ire in the form of that death impulse. He may have been a meme to us, and to be honest, he's kind of a meme to his father, Oryx, but his defeat really did matter in the end because it did start to unravel a dynasty. There's a reason why Guardians abandoned the moon, and there's a reason why the Vanguard listened more closely to Eris after Crota's death. Crota was a menace, Crota mattered, and Crota was in many ways the herald of the end of humanity. It really told that a new age had begun and a new era of Guardians was beginning to rise when Crota died and his father came to the system to challenge them. Considering all of that, and understanding that Crota is a paracausal entity capable of greater power than certain individuals within the Vex, I think it's fair to say that he would rank within the A tier. Now, let's keep in mind, he did get his ass whooped a bunch by the Vex, so maybe this rating is a little bit off. He did have to call in Daddy Oryx in order to clear all of that up. However, this, I think, only ranks as one more reason to call Oryx Daddy, and if you are really going to rank the Vex against Crota, I do believe that Crota would eventually have won out. It was merely down to the rather inventive mind of Coria that the Hive had somewhat of a back footing in those engagements. So again, I think a solid A tier ranking is appropriate. We just have to remember that Crota is still never going to be free from calling Oryx Daddy. Moving on, and the House of Wolves didn't have a raid, but for memes, let's go ahead and put the Madman Prophet Skolas here, all the way down in F tier as the worst Kell of Kells in history, and probably the worst Kell the House of Wolves has ever known. Anyway, onto some proper enemies next. Oryx, the Taken King. This is one of those moments where it's not hard to understand immediately why we have to rank Oryx in S tier. he has put hundreds of thousands, if not millions of worlds to the torch. We don't know the true number. We do not. We understand that the War Priest has completed a circuit 585 times where he has managed to put worlds to the torch in Oryx's name. We don't know the true body count of the Taken King, and that is something that should terrify us. And what's more, he destroyed one of the worm gods in order to obtain the power of the deep. We would later understand in the Witch Queen that this power was indeed the power to take, but also much more than that because it could be used to abduct planets. And that power was one that Oryx learned. In the right hands, it was enough to pull entire worlds into the Witness's dark domain, which is what happened to Mars, Mercury, Io, and Titan. Oryx, however, would use it to create his armies, the Taken, beings that had been taken and corrupted by darkness and sent back as loyal combatants. Having said that, this is not where Oryx's power ends. Oryx is one of the few entities that has spoken directly to the Witness, Destiny's ultimate big bad of the darkness. He was even attempting to get to the point where he was in fact one with death himself. He wished to make himself an axiom of death. In other words, to say that wherever Oryx was, death was too, and wherever death was, Oryx was. He, in this sense, would have been able to become one with the sword logic and live forever. He wasn't successful, of course, but depending on your opinions of the Touch of Malice, he might actually have still been able to cheat death in some regard. At the height of his power, he was easily the most powerful thing that a hive could become, with maybe the exception of Savathun when she took the light, but that's not currently in our discussion for this video. All of this makes me rank Oryx without any hesitation clearly up there, immediately in S tier, without any contest or hesitation. Next up, we have Axis, the Archon Prime, of the House of Devils and their Splicers. Axis is important to the Fallen because they have certain conceptions of godhood. Namely, especially around about this time, they believed that machines are gods. When we fight Axis in the raid, he has ascended into mechanical apotheosis and has become a machine. To the Splicers and the Fallen generally, this is essentially the same as him becoming a god. Does that mean he has godlike powers? Well, no. Axis is powerful, but by no means does he break the causality of the universe. There are other things that quite rightly get called gods in Destiny. Worm gods, the different hive gods, all sorts of different things all over the place, sometimes even guardians. Axis is not one of those things. Axis is a category well below that. His control of the Siva allows him to address threats such as guardians, so it would be wrong to state that he's a complete pushover. Siva is in fact the same force that killed all but 2 of the Iron Lords in the Plague Lands, and it would be wise to remember that it's not impossible for Axis to use the Siva nanites at his disposal to a similar effect on us. All that being said, at the end of the day, machines can break, and so too did Axis. His power was a significant rising threat, worth addressing, but even with the power of the Siva, I wouldn't rank him any higher in power than that of C tier. Now onto the raid bosses of Destiny 2, and it's here that we're going to start filling out the tier list a little bit more and bringing a bit of balance to some of these tiers. Destiny 1 bosses have a perfectly even spread from S to C, but it's gonna go ahead and start changing things. Whether it's because of asymmetric powers or whether it's because of the lack thereof, there are interesting combatants in Destiny 2, sure, but some of them start to drop off. However, many of them do also stay very interesting, and luckily we get to start there with Emperor Calus. And it's here that I want to go ahead and do something interesting. We're definitely at this point where making a judgment on what Calus's power is would seem very premature. He is likely to be a villain that we face in Lightfall, and it's obvious enough that in the Leviathan raid, we didn't kill him. It's obvious enough to us that even in the Season of the Haunted, we didn't kill him. I'll still rank the fight, but we clearly need to put a pin in this rating for later. So how powerful is he? Well, as an individual robot, spoiler, he possesses some remarkable weaponry, but he has nothing that is beyond the typical range of one expects from a causal threat. The real asymmetric power has to predominantly come from his Scion Counselors. These Counselors are a threat because of their ability to send the Emperor's enemies into a nightmarish psionic dimension that is literally known as the Nightmare Realm. This is a unique asymmetric power which allows a certain degree of control for the Emperor and his forces. Psionic power in Destiny is still poorly understood, and it's not even clear if it's paracausal in nature or not. This, however, is a direct enough use of it to be a serious danger in some ways to us, so I figured that it was very much worth including. And it can be a similar danger to other things presented by other species that are paracausal. Judging Calus as a raid boss based on his apex power is also hard again, because it's not clear if he's reached his apex power yet. As a result, I'm breaking the rules of the tier list just a little bit here, but ultimately, for the moment, I'm going to rank him D tier, based on what he's like currently, well, what he used to be like in the Leviathan raid way back when it wasn't Sunset. Psionic power is still poorly understood, and it's not technically even Calus's power to command, but we also don't know the true form and power of what the Cabal Emperor is. So for the moment, again, yeah, we're just basing it on what we see in the raid. Please go ahead and let me know what you think, because inevitably this is going to be one of those ones that sparks a ton of comments. Next up, we have Argos. No, not that Argos. This Argos, yep. Planetary core of Nessus that was sucked up by the Leviathan. This is a Vex construct of remarkable size. It's actually the biggest Vex construct we've ever faced in Destiny, and the pure scale of this thing is pretty magnificent. Its weapons are not paracausal, and its abilities are not really much to write home about beyond the typical size and bombardment that you would expect out of a massive Vex frame. It has the ability to fire highly charged energy weapons at us, and to overload the surrounding air with void energy that then detonates. Sure, that's a powerful ability, but we should forget that even by factoring this in, yeah, it's still not that powerful in comparison. Argos is the core of a planet, but I don't think it's really anything more than a lesser raid boss when you look at it. We were able to dispatch it inside the core of the Leviathan's hot, burning furnace, and it's debatable indeed that the Vex here could have some greater powers, so I believe that it's right to keep it in D tier, and maybe not too much lower. But then again, it really does depend. If it turns out that the powers granted to Calus's Scions in the Nightmare Realm are in fact paracausal, I might rank him higher, and if it turns out that the Vex constructs that make up planet cores are actually a lot more sort of designed for maintenance and building, and aren't truly as powerful as they could be, then yeah, I suppose I'd actually look at this and I'd think, okay, this might belong in E tier. So yeah, not great. But wait, it gets worse. What if I told you about the rankings of the Cabal, and told you that one of our raid bosses technically was lower ranked than one of the enemies we face in the process of Destiny 1's story? No, even better. What if I told you this was technically a lower ranked enemy than good old Valus Ta'ark from the Copypasta? Yep, it's time for Val Kaor. Val, not Valus, because he's not earned that rank yet. He is a Val. Whilst this is arguably one of the toughest Destiny Day 1 raids to complete, it's also most definitely one of the least inspired encounters. There is no adequate explanation of the powers on display here, and I do believe, therefore, it's hard to gauge whether this actually is power displayed by Valkor, or whether it's based around the encounter, or whether it's based around the Calus robot that's involved. All this leads me to see Valkor, unfortunately, as kind of a very oversized, heavily armored Cabal Incendior. Now, he did win a fistfight with one of the Calus robots for a bit, but we've already discussed how that doesn't necessarily measure the real power of Calus, and that's also not to mention the fact that the Calus robot also helps us in the process of that fight, and helps to break his shields in the Spire of Stars. So, yeah, he did backhand him, but I mean, aside from the significant auxiliaries and the fleet that's floating above, yeah, there's just really not that much that's significant about Val Kaor. The Red Legion fleet behind him is the more menacing part of the encounter. So, sorry Valkor, you go down in the F tier. You are nothing special. You and Skolas can hang out there and have a party and decide who is bad. I don't know, you're both bad. Anyway, next up we have one of the most interesting entries on this list, and one that inevitably is going to spark a lot of conversation, and that's Riven of 1,000 Voices. I expect disagreements on this one purely because of the fact that there are huge implications to the lore surrounding Riven, and the scope of her powers is truly hard to gauge and unique. Riven is the last Ahamkara, and has access to the most powerful asymmetric paracausal ability that one can obtain, namely Wish Magic. Wish Magic essentially grants the wish or desire of whatever being comes into contact with Riven, but there's always a Faustian bargain to the wish that's granted. It always comes with a monkey's paw. It's always a devil's contract, and that means that Riven and other Ahamkara who could make use of this power are able to twist these wishes to their advantage with remarkable skill. This is actually how they hunt. This is what they feed on: desire. The best example of this is probably the instance in which Riven was able to twist the wish of Oryx, the Taken King. After Oryx had killed Mara Sov, he invaded the Dreaming City with one of his echoes, and he used it to ask Riven if she wanted to be taken. She then laid a trap, verbally, by replying, "Only if you wish it." Riven was then taken by Oryx, but it also transpired that she was able to maintain her free will after his death. Considering what we know about being taken, this means that Wish Dragons and Wish Magic have the capability of defying the power even of the Witness's influence, if given the correct circumstances. However, Riven's power is directly relative to the desires of the opposition in question. She is able to challenge Oryx in this matter, but against the forces of the Vex, who have no obvious emotion and only a process that they follow, I think it would be hard for Riven to exert any power. With this consideration, I figured it was fair to assume that most beings in Destiny, even down to the Witness, have desires. Therefore, Riven's power is really widely applicable, even with the former mentioned Vex example, and it can be used to manipulate even the strongest of foes. One also has to consider her significant physical size and combat abilities, such as her ability to literally breathe fire. Pretty remarkable. You have an actual fire-breathing dragon. Now, I'm sure some of you will disagree, and it's a very close one for me between the A and the S tier. The fact that she was able to outsmart Oryx and eventually even outlive him tells me that Riven is indeed a raid boss that is worthy of the S tier. I think that it might be a slightly lower S tier than some, and I'd be happy to listen to your own opinions on this one, because again, I think there's a lot to unpack here, but Wish Magic is just so powerful, so unique that it always wins out. It won't save an Ahamkara necessarily, but it's an ability that will scar your enemies to their core, and ultimately leave the Ahamkara, even in death, as the one with the last laugh. Again, let me know what you think in the comments. This is going to be the most fascinating part of the entire video. Next up, we have the lovable Fallen Mech Warrior online walking copyright lawsuit that is Insurrection Prime. I jest, but really, this thing, it is totally a Mech Warrior online inspired concept, and you know what? I love that. Look at this thing. It's amazing. Power ranking aside, it's definitely one of the cooler boss ideas, and I'm actually glad that it became a generic enemy later down the line, because you know what? It's such an awesome design. Having it squirreled away just to Insurrection Prime would have been a shame. Anyway, Insurrection Prime is more than just a large brig because it's been reinforced with the advanced weaponry of the Black Armory. This weaponry has proven powerful and has a unique form of resonant power. I do not believe that this resonant power is the same as that displayed on the pyramids, so keep that in mind, but I do believe that its massive weapons do give it a certain degree of power that is considerable. However, it's still a causal threat. And I don't think it's as big a causal threat as something like, say, Argos, which is enormous, powered by advanced Vex technology, and perhaps more importantly, was still putting up a fight when it was broken and bruised. So, all things considered, I think unfortunately for Insurrection Prime, it's gonna go down there in the E tier. Next up, we have Galran, the Sorrowbearer. Spare a thought for what is undoubtedly the most unfortunate of raid bosses in Destiny. Galran was created by Calus and was born with the purpose of bearing the Crown of Sorrows. His entire life is essentially suffering, and it's all he's ever known. It's mainly because Calus immediately put the Crown of Sorrows on his head, and Savathun immediately used it to possess him, and then used him as a conduit to control the hive aboard the Leviathan within Calus's menagerie. Galran's forces are hive forces, and they're weird in that regard because they're clearly being commanded by Savathun's influence, but the power that the Witch Queen funnels into Galran is therefore a metric we sort of have to understand to gauge Galran's power. It's by no means a significant proportion of her power, but it's consistently able to be used to invoke abilities based around deception that would seem to be based easily in hive magic. It's really hard to judge, but based on all this, I think it would be fair to say that Galran has a limited degree of paracausal power. With that in mind, alongside the powers of deception that help to shield Galran's true form, I think it'd be fair to rank Galran in the high C tier. He's probably not as powerful as a being like Atheon, but he's certainly got access to a greater degree of power than most typical Cabal. The odd thing is that if Galran had lived longer, and if Savathun had exerted more control through him, he might have actually gotten an even higher rating on this scale. But the reality is that we just don't know enough about the power that Savathun could have exerted through Galran, and the Crown of Sorrow by proxy. So again, it's very hard to judge all of this, but C ranking is where I'm putting Galran for the moment. Next up, we have the Sanctified Mind. Boy, this is a frustrating fight to play, that's for sure. The Sanctified Mind is a really tough fight to examine because on the surface it's another Vex, Axis Mind, which is not much more than a B or C tier threat at most. But then one remembers that this is a Vex of the Soul Divisive, and that changes everything. This is a Vex that has directly exposed itself to the powers of the Witness, and therefore has bonded itself to dark powers. The Soul Divisive made the decision to worship the darkness when they encountered it, so that they might survive. In doing so, they obtained some of the darkness's power, and as a result, they bound themselves to its will. This gives them a unique degree of dark power that other Vex just don't have. The extent to which they use it is potentially limited, but the Vex of the Black Garden are nonetheless a major threat. Given enough time, these Vex, including the Sanctified Mind, would smother the system in darkness as they spread. That spread is something that's hard to often anticipate or really gauge. However, the fact that they're directly empowered by the Witness is something that we should not ignore. I think the rating for the Sanctified Mind therefore has to be somewhere in the high B or low A tier. And I'm going to go ahead and put it as the highest possible B at the moment, just because of the fact that, like Galran, the power that can be displayed and allowed to flow through this conduit is potentially limited. It's one of those moments where it's really hard to judge, and I wouldn't complain about it being in the A tier either. So we'll see, but for the moment, that's where I'm going to leave it. And ultimately, on our list, we have the greatest meme of all the Fallen, none other than Taniks the Abomination, who has no house, kneels before no banner, and yada yada yada, you know the rest. He has been killing Guardians a dozen at a time. Canonically, we've killed him 3 times, once in his normal form, once in his Siva form, and here in the Deepstone Crypt raid form, where he appears to have a few interesting Golden Age upgrades, including all the stuff that Mr. Exhibit clearly gave him. I mean, look at that, that ride has absolutely been pimped. More importantly than all of that, and all that aside, Taniks has been killed more times than just by us. Cayde 6 killed him at least once or twice, and that was him alone. All those other things about Taniks' prior career as a hunter of Guardians and a famed mercenary are things we should also remember. Taniks is a mere causal threat, but you'd be wrong to underestimate him based purely on the fact that he's been there taking out Guardians since he was first hired. I have little doubt that he's one of the most tenacious enemies we've faced, and that he might not have even truly died in the Deepstone Crypt raid. With all that said though, even with the power and technology recovered from Europa, Taniks is only really a threat because he's incorporated nukes into his chassis and design. Kinda cheating on the 25 kill streak there, bud. Anyway, the real point is that I'd call Taniks an E-tier threat, and that's being generous up there. It's powerful, don't get me wrong, but Taniks is not... he doesn't have any kind of claim to paracausal power in the same way that, say, Crota or Oryx does. He doesn't even have some of the asymmetric and really powerful abilities such as Siva. So, yeah, I don't believe that Taniks is really it. Finally, we have our last and latest raid boss, Rhulk, the first disciple of the Witness. Rhulk, to put it simply, is the most powerful being we've ever faced and killed in Destiny. We don't have an S+ tier, but if we did, it would be entirely his own. The common point of comparison is to that of Oryx, and it's often stated that Oryx is more powerful than Rhulk. And to this I say, read your lore. With Oryx being the common point of comparison, I think it's worth remembering that he was the first being that we knew of that had contacted the Witness, or the Deep as he would have put it. Here's the thing though, Rhulk, as best we know, was the first of the disciples ever. And more importantly than that, at the height of his power, he was able to accomplish feats quietly and subtly that would have driven Oryx mad. Let me give you a little bit of an example. The Shattered Suns lore book talks about how he destroyed his entire people by splitting the sun of his world in half. He used his own technology and the Witness's power in order to do this. That was just the start of his journey as a lieutenant of the Witness. He is responsible for the creation of the entire Hive species, and was entrusted by the Witness to carry out the ultimate plan for them, to turn them into loyal, mindless slaves on an eternal blood tithe. If we're to make the most direct comparison with Oryx, Oryx's greatest triumph was the slaying of Akka and his subsequent communion with the Deep. Rhulk was able to show that his might was great enough to defeat the worm's mother, Shaita, when he literally lifted her out of the deep oceans of Fundament with a bone that he'd ripped out of the chest of the Leviathan. The other worm gods, again gods to the Hive, called Rhulk the Subjugator. They didn't fight him because they knew he was too powerful. Rhulk channels some of the most devastating abilities of the Pyramids and the Witness in combat, and has access to some of its greater mechanisms. Having his own pyramid ship is one thing, his ability to make use of the superweapon known as the Upended is something that has allowed him to bring ruin to whole worlds, and it's implied that he could even do this to Savathun's throne world. Yep, Hive throne worlds are not safe, ladies and gents. To understand how powerful Rhulk really is, the Witness's forces under Rhulk were being used as part of a turf war in Savathun's own throne world. This was a turf war that Savathun, the most powerful of all Hive at the time, the one whose power might have even eclipsed that of Oryx, was losing. Were it not for the Curse of Light that Savathun put on Rhulk's pyramid, she might have been immediately wiped out by the first disciple. It took the combined powers of the light and the dark for Guardians to defeat him. He is, without question, the most powerful foe that we have ever faced. From his overt ability to destroy entire worlds, to his more subtle combat prowess, to his pyramid technology that lets him literally drown us in darkness. Every way we fight Rhulk, we can see his power. He displays it to us. He struts around and does not care. He is a palatial guard and we are well below his station. We are lesser to him, and he does not even truly respect us as combatants. Therefore, unquestionably, Rhulk easily makes the S tier. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what lists you want next. I have a whole bunch of different ideas, but I want to know where you guys want to take it. and do let me know if you enjoyed the video by leaving a like too. Also, remember that for more Destiny lore content, you can hit subscribe and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. But as per usual, know that your viewership is quite enough for me, and that in the meantime, my name is Byf. Prodacia ad Astra. I'll see you Starside.